I do like how Thrawn's plan basically worked perfectly. The only thing that got in the way, really, was one idiot. I love little mouse droids, by the way. The little mouse droid vents, that's a nice touch. So we see General Dodona, and he's involved. He's got one of the biggest fleets in the area, and it shows. He's got several Nebulon Bs. I'm pretty sure I saw a Dreadnought in the back there. And by the scales we're talking, that's big. Like, that's actually a legitimately large fleet. Remember, the Rebel fleet of our local stuff is a couple of Corvettes, one Pulsar or Quasar Fire, and like a few transports and some fighters, and that's basically it. So you can tell how this is a big deal, and of course that's exactly what Thrawn wanted, to crush as large of a force in one battle as is possible. There's a nice bit where Callus decides to fight Thrawn one-on-one. Thrawn actually does win that fight, as he should. Remember, we already established that he's good in a one-on-one fight, and he probably keeps up on it more than Callus does. But there's a nice bit where Thrawn says, "You have the heart of a rebel," and Callus says, "I'll take that as a compliment." And Thrawn has an unusual expression on his face there. There's a lot of characterization to Thrawn. I mean, he's got, what, 3 books in the AU, plus this show? So, I may be going out of line here, because I haven't actually read those books, and I'll be honest about that, but I like to think that Thrawn was taking that remark a little bit too personally. It's effectively that Thrawn's... Put simply, I don't think Thrawn is a truly evil entity. I think it's more likely that he loves the artistry of warfare, of strategy, of tactics. That's understandable, right? Haven't you ever played an RTS game? Or a grand strategy, or a 4X, or a turn-based tactical? There's so many different types of war games out there, right? Tabletop, pen and paper, video. It's easy to understand the allure because there is an allure there. And this, of course, leads me to my theory on this particular Thrawn. That for him, he works best when he is distanced from what he is working for. Based on some things, I do think he has some legitimate loyalties, notably to the Ascendancy. But I think he actively strives to keep that distance between him and his targets, him and the individuals, because that makes it easier for him to think of them as simply competitors, an opponent on the other side of the board. This also probably helps to explain why he is so easy to show respect and consideration for his opponents. It does also lead to some interesting things. So there's this bit where someone says, "You want all the glory for yourself," and he says, "No, I require no glory, only the conclusion of my emperor's will." I don't buy that for a second. But I do think it is a partial truth that he is here as part of his deal. He is serving Palpatine. I know about the deal. So he is serving Palpatine in exchange for, a larger scale, more long-term gain for him and for his people. So right now, all he really cares about is accomplishing that will. The Emperor's will. That's it. Nothing else really matters because he doesn't really care about most of this stuff. You'll notice I'm just talking about Thrawn. I'm just talking about Thrawn. This is a Thrawn-heavy episode, okay? The only other thing I really have to talk about is the Bendu. We'll get to him in a second. So, the interdictors come in. He says, "I'm no longer accepting surrender. This is total defeat. That's what we're going for here. This is now the end game. We've played back and forth. I am informing you that this is over." Now, then Constantine says, "Oh, enough, we need to send forward." And he's like, "But Thrawn ordered us to stay put. I will not be denied the glory of this kill." And then Constantine dies. But so does Commander Sato. That's a good moment. The death of 2 recurring characters like that has a significant impact. It's funny because both of them die very in character. Sato has a tremendous sacrifice that he gives in order to salvage what little scrap of hope they have in this situation. Basically, all he's trying to do is take out an interdictor so that a ship can get out on the hope that they might be able to get some reinforcements. That's it. That's all he's got. The defeat of that interdictor isn't even really substantial in the wake of the rest of the fleet, so it's not like it's really a military victory, right? He does that, and it's brave and it's self-sacrificing and it's awesome. And Constantine dies fully in character. An idiot who disobeys a direct order in a combat zone at war. All three of these things, by the way, can lead to a court-martial or execution in a normal real-life military, never mind the Galactic Empire, and does so just because he wants, and I quote, the glory of the kill. He dies like a moron. As an aside, I note that Thrawn is far less masking of his disdain for Constantine in this episode. So, there's this bit where Mon Mothma says, maybe Organa was right. It was too soon for open warfare. And honestly, it might have been. I've said before, and I've said it again, I feel like we've got a bit of a snowball effect going on here. And I think it all started with this cell and their push against, the local forces, which led to Tarkin getting involved, which led to them pushing back against him and getting the attention of even bigger forces and so forth and so on. In short, I think they rebelled so successfully that they necessitated the war starting before, honestly, they were ready. But I want to talk about the Bendu briefly. I hate pacifism. I've talked about that before. At least I should say extremist pacifism. I find it interesting that at first Kanan tries to appeal to his sense of survivalism. But the Bendu's like, I'm not afraid. What the hell, dude? They're not going to get me. And so then he tries to appeal to his sense of ethics, his sense of morality. And it feels like that actually pricks him a bit. It gets to him. But the Bendu, well, he says something very interesting to me. Maybe it is the will of the Force that you all die, and I serve the will of the Force. This is a theory that's been cycling around for a long time, ever since the original trilogies, and then the EU started expanding on this idea and then was axed. But even the AU has expounded on this very thought, that maybe the will of the Force is not necessarily good. This is something that George Lucas himself was thinking of, an idea that maybe the will of the Force itself on a long-term scale should be opposed in the favor of the individual sentience and sapience of living life. It's an interesting concept, and I think that's one of the reasons why so many different groups have all tried to analyze this exact same thing. Because this is our insight into this here in Rebels. The Bendu pretty much flat out says it. That it's entirely possible that this is all something that the Force wants, and thus forces the question, no pun intended, do we care what the Force wants? This is also especially substantial given who he is saying this to. Kanan. I've pointed out many times in this show how many times Kanan has really leaned on the Force. Heavily. Blind, no pun intended, blind trust in the Force. And that was his only teacher. It was his only trainer. It was all he had. And so he leans on that heavily. He even embarked that into Ezra. For him to be told that, well, now that is interesting, isn't it? But we've got one more episode, one last one before Season 3, and I swear I'm going to get this done tonight, so I'll see you next time.